Etsy witch $7.99 to make your life a living hell. Brace yourself.
I paid an Etsy witch to put a good luck spell on me, and here's how long it took for good things to start happening.
No, I think I'm going to cry. My Etsy witch has died.
What are your favorite spells?
The egg spell.
The egg spell?
You cleanse yourself with an egg, right? Pass the egg all over yourself, praying for all of your negativity to go away into the egg, right? But usually you do it like when somebody's f***ing with you to get like what the person is doing off of you. You crack it in the crossroad and you walk away and you don't look back. That shit works.
It's a good time to be a witch.
The people need witches. The people need the Etsy witches.
For some, it's an essential service, like going to the opticians. Please go to the opticians. The US psychic services industry was worth $2 billion last year and is projected to grow to $4.5 billion by 2033, which is more than Americans spend on dog walking services today, but less than they spend on nail salons. The medium, pun intended, in which the growth is manifesting, whoa, double pun, is through the digital realm. There are TikTok tarot readings made just for you, apparently.
This might be the most accurate tarot reading you have ever received. This video, I manifest that it finds everyone who it will resonate for. So if this video found you, you are one of the lucky people.
You can acquire a medium service over Zoom. It's never been easier to purchase a love spell on Etsy. In fact, I may get one for my cat because he can be quite rude to me sometimes. Back in the day, if a woman was called a witch, you would assume it's an insult. Whereas now, if someone says she's a witch, there's follow-up questions like, oh, do you mean like literally a witch, like she does spells and stuff? It's not a given that it's a pejorative anymore. And that is a beautiful thing. Now, granted, this assessment that I've made has likely been skewed by the fact that I'm in the London metropolitan elite bubble, my Keir Starmer impression. If you find a room to rent in East London, there's a 43% chance that you're sharing with someone who participates in witchy activities and is in their own queer coven. They might even host the coven gatherings in your living room, so make sure to buy earplugs. Pro tip for the gays, if you enter a coven with your partner, make sure you have an action plan for who gets custody in the event of a breakup. Trust me on that one. I am neither witch nor Wicca affiliated, but I describe myself as witch curious. I do tend to be awake at witching hour, but that could be due to my sleep phase disorder. If I had to pick a religion, I'd probably pick some form of paganism. I've consulted some witchy folk for this video, including you, the viewers. It turns out I've got some witchy folk in my audience. But if you're new here, my name is Tara Mooney, and this is the only channel on YouTube where all videos are written and produced by a cow. She couldn't be in the video tonight because she's actually at one of her coven gatherings. She is the high priestess of her coven. But if you like this video and subscribe to our channel, she might appear in the next video. Is the cow practicing witchcraft? Tara is the cow's familiar. I hope that clears things up. When you look at the history of the witch persecutions, it's no wonder that women today are reclaiming witchiness as a form of political disobedience. There are witches on TikTok casting spells on ice to prevent harm, or inflict harm on ice, but I'll get into that later. The historical narratives surrounding the witch trials are riddled with myths. History YouTuber Kaz Rowe has an excellent video debunking myths about medieval witch hunts, though I'll mainly be referencing the witch trials in early modern Europe. This video here is less about the true history of witch trials and witchcraft, but I do think it's important to explore some of the history in order to inform how we've gotten to the digital witchy zeitgeist of today in the year of our Lord 2025. Knowing the myths will hopefully inform you on how and why the witches are seen as they are today. Oh, and full disclosure, I am going to be self-censoring in this video. Not because I'm a totalitarian anti-free speech monster who wants George Orwell's 1894, but because I'll be using some spicy words and I don't want this video to be hexed by youtube.com, because then it won't get seen by people, and In fact, when I spend 100+ hours on a video, I do want people to see it. Sue me. I want views. If I didn't, then why would I post these videos publicly? Huh? Checkmate, atheist. Anywho, I've seen creators on WitchTok, for example, sharing sentiments like, our ancestors died practicing witchcraft, so hear me roar kind of thing. And in fairness, some of the jokes online are tongue-in-cheek. You know, for example, I'm 30, childless, I have 6 cats, I'm bisexual, mentally ill, my dog is gay, I'd have been burned at the stake for this. But in reality, in English-speaking countries, victims were rarely burned alive at the stake, they were usually hanged, and sometimes their bodies would be burned after. To be fair, the people saying this might have German ancestry. Rather than it being millions executed, it was approximately 30,000 to 60,000 according to English Heritage, in reference to what Professor Diane Purkis calls the main era of witchcraft persecutions, from the 1427 to 36 witch hunts in Savoy, in the Western Alps, to the execution of Anna Goldie in the Swiss canton of Glarus in 1782. These figures include for cases where no records exist. Now, onto the fun part. Gender demographics. In England and Scotland, the majority of those accused were women, and in England, most of the accusers and those making written complaints against witches were women. There were searchers who would aid investigations to find marks of the devil on the accusers' bodies. Women would search other women, men would search men accused. Why yes, men were also accused of being witches. A witch is in fact a gender-neutral term, despite the probable title of this video. Me referring to a witch as she is not me declaring that only women can be witches and witches can only be women, but more to say, or at least I'd argue, that the average person, when thinking of witch, will think of a woman. So I hope that clears that up. Anywho, across Europe, approximately 6,000 men, 10 to 15% of the total, were executed for witchcraft. So women were indeed the majority. Yes, representation. Women-dominated fields for the win. On a serious note, the why these people were accused is complicated. The main takeaway is this: the people accused weren't practicing witchcraft, nor even claiming to do so, unless after being tortured into a confession. The title of this chapter is in reference to a campaign by Claudia Pajol, the editor of the Catalan history and culture magazine Sapiens, and historian Pal Castel Granados. Sorry, I'm very monolingual. They were inspired by Scotland's apology on International Women's Day 2022 to those persecuted as witches. Later that same year, the Catalan Parliament passed a resolution pardoning around 1,000 women found guilty of the crime of witchcraft. Therefore, they were not witches, they were women. Some historians reference this era as a femicide. Some vehemently push back against this. There is some flawed feminist history surrounding the witch persecutions. I can't deny that. The Burning Times narrative, perpetuated by 20th century historians, is rightfully being corrected. There was a Canadian 1990 documentary called The Burning Times, which claimed that 9 million women were killed in what they called
The Women's Holocaust.
Gynecology, The Meta-Ethics of Radical Feminism by Mary Daly, writes misinformation such as stating that millions of women were... We now know that isn't true, and Daly creates parallels using flimsy examples and likening bad reviews and poor publicity of feminist books to Nazi book burnings. Yikes, don't do that. On the flip side, there are historians whom, in my opinion, are perhaps a little too eager to dismiss the role of misogyny in the witch trials. You know, but women accused women. Get wrecked, feminists.
Some scholars, I think wrongly, have used the fact that this happened, women were often accusing other women, to say, you know, the trials weren't really about gender. They didn't really have anything to do with this. When in fact, of course, it makes sense that women would accuse other women. Right? Most of these things, these initial allegations of witchcraft, start in the home. She poisoned my baby. She did something to my husband. She made it impossible for me to churn my butter. I also want to say that if you're in the midst of a very intense witch hunt, it is safer if you're a woman, to be on the side of helping identify who the accused witches were.
So yeah, the Burning Times narrative is inaccurate and bad, but also to act as if that feminists are completely barking up the wrong tree for claiming that misogyny was a very important role in the witch trials also isn't fair. So the takeaway is this: anyone of any gender could be a witch. Both men and women were for it, but most tried and were women. They weren't burned at the stake. It wasn't millions. It wasn't midwives being targeted. In fact, many midwives helped with the investigations, and those accused weren't actually practicing witchcraft, just regular people. Dr. Philippa Carter, professor of the history of medicine at Cambridge, argues that the types of employment open to women at the time came with much higher risk of facing allegations of witchcraft, or maleficium. In a study published in the Journal of Gender and History, Carter used the casebooks of Richard Napier, an astrologer. See, astrology isn't just for the girls, who treated clients in Jacobean England using star charts and elixirs to analyse links between witchcraft accusations and the occupations of those under suspicion. Women worked mostly in healthcare, childcare, food preparation, dairy production, and or livestock care. Also, they often worked multiple jobs, where they'd be crisscrossing between homes, bakehouses, wells, marketplaces, rather than off in fields or workshops. They worked not just in one high-risk sector, but in many at once. It stacked the odds against them, i.e. they were in contact with a lot of different people in a lot of different places, and they dealt with perishables. My worst nightmare. God bless my parents for conceiving me in 1994. Many accusations stemmed from simply being present around the time of another's misfortune. Don't ever be present at the scene of the crime. The safest option is to not attend things. Be a recluse. Between 1597 and 1634, Napier recorded 1,714 witchcraft accusations. The majority of both accusers and suspects were women, although the ratio of female suspects was much higher. 9 out of 10 suspects who sold food were women, with 25 accusations resulting from a bout of sickness after being fed. And this is why I don't cook for others. The most you're getting out of me is chips and dips. A cooked lasagna at my table over my dead body. Anyways, why have I shared all of this? Other than finding it interesting and my love language being info dumping, it isn't just to be that guy who says, actually, but to piece together how historical narratives, whether true or not, have shaped feminist discourse today. Done. I'm not sure if you're aware, but a lot happened in the 20th century. But I can't get into it all today. Wait, if this guy can condense a history of the entire world in 19 minutes, then what am I doing here?
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Witches came up in both first and second wave feminism. Matilda Jocelyn Gage was a suffragist who was radical for her time, and at the Statue of Liberty's unveiling in 1886, she showed up on a cattle barge with a megaphone, shouting that it was a gigantic lie, a travesty and a mockery to portray liberty as a woman, when actual American women had so few rights. Fair. She was thereby branded as satanic and a heretic, and later published a manifesto, Women, Church and State, in 1893, where she discussed the witch persecutions and criticised the church's subjugation of women. Bars. Fun fact, her son-in-law was L. Frank Baum, author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, published in 1900. If you're familiar with The Wizard of Oz, you'll know that it has the idea of good witches and bad witches, challenging the idea that all witches were inherently bad.
Are you a good witch or a bad witch?
It was essentially a rebrand. The book was banned in some public libraries due to its unchristian themes and having women in leadership roles. Yay for history! It was Gage who suggested to Baum on putting a cyclone in a children's story, and she made her mark for sure. Now let's jump to the latter part of the 20th century, the era of second wave feminism. In New York, 1968, we had the establishment of WITCH, an acronym for Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell. This was formed as an offshoot group from New York radical women. Their mission wasn't just to criticize the patriarchy, but also Capitalism. They did what one may call hit-and-run guerrilla theatre in the form of a public demonstration known as a ZAP, where they combined poetry, protest, and witchcraft. Their first ZAP was on Halloween 1968. They came to Wall Street dressed as witches, declaring it the epicenter of corporate America's persecution of women, and demanded an audience with Satan, our superior, at the stock exchange. So they brought a papier-mâché pig's head on a golden plate, which makes me think of that scene from the Hunger Games where Katniss shoots the pig. And that's great. But honestly, the thing I find most memorable about that scene is that some guy is just saying, "Hey, who ordered the pig?"
Hey, who ordered this pig? Who ordered this pig?
Who did order the pig? I want to know. They also had brooms and wands, and they surrounded the statue of George Washington on the building stairs because it was a symbol of patriarchal, slave-holding power. Then they performed a spell to render the bank's money and gold bars useless. The next day, the Dow Jones stock market index fell. I mean, they publicly hexed everything they didn't like, from beauty pageants to fees on public transit. In February 1969, they hexed a bridal fair at Madison Square Garden wearing black veils and hosted an unwedding. They issued "Confront the Whore Makers" stickers as a spin on the leftist slogan "Confront the War Makers." They ended their protest by releasing live white mice in the bridal fair. And it's said that they assumed that the women there would be freaked out by the mice, but apparently they tried to help the mice and set them free. They were provocative, for sure. They were imperfect, for sure. But I do want to point out that they did have an attempt at intersectionality that a lot of the mainstream radical feminists at the time was sorely lacking. There's a witch poem called "Pass the Word, Sister," about the confinement of 6 Black Panther women at Connecticut State Prison in 1969. Children oppressed on welfare in orphanages, in schools, in foster homes, by poverty, by routine, by racism, by male supremacy. Therefore, witch curses the state and declares it unfit. And the poem's opening verse concludes, "All 6 are black, all 6 are Panthers, all 6 are sisters." And I guess that brings me into the murky feminist branding around witches. If you've been to a women's march or event, I'm sure you've seen the slogan, "We are the daughters or granddaughters of the witches you couldn't burn." Now, your knee-jerk reaction might depend on how familiar you are with the phrase. On the face of it, it's a tongue-in-cheek slogan and a fun metaphor to highlight how women are crucified, metaphorically, in ways that feel like witch hunts. I mean, I think of AOC when she first came on the scene, and oh my god, she was Fox News' favourite boogeyman. It almost comes with the territory as a female politician to be called a witch at some point, so think of Margaret Thatcher, Hillary Clinton. The Sanders campaign had to disavow supporters who made merch saying "Burn the Witch." When Margaret Thatcher died, the song from The Wizard of Oz, "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead," reached number 2 in the UK official chart. In the 2018 documentary RBG, a recording of conservative talk show host Michael Savage is shown, and he refers to her as "this witch." So in light of all this, some feminists have been reclaiming the witch title as a sort of feminist battle cry, rather than identifying as literal witches. And some of these feminists are TERFs. I mean, I'm being liberal in calling TERFs feminists. Anyways, for some, the "we're the granddaughters of the witches you couldn't burn" is a red flag because of Joanne, and or simply because it evokes, girl boss, corporate, pussy hat wearing feminism. Oh, and don't get me started on how you feel about it if you're a historian. This winds me up to no end, and I want to explain why. After all, enough people seem to find this idea radical that you can buy variations of this twee-ass shit on shirts, notepads, wherever. Yeah, okay, you might say, it's a bit basic, but is it bad? Yes, I would argue. Yes, it is. And they state that the women who were killed during the early modern witch trials were not, in fact, witches. They were just regular people. And I suppose by chanting this slogan, you are essentially agreeing with their accusers. And it reinforces factual inaccuracies, like how they most likely weren't burned at the stake. My knee-jerk reaction to reading this was that metaphors exist. So, being charitable, I think when people say "we're the witches, blah, blah, blah," they don't literally mean witches. They mean witches in air quotes. It's a response to it being used against women. But I do also understand where this historian is coming from. I say this not to, well, actually, the remembrance of the witch panics, but to point out that the entire thing was a disgusting waste of human life, and that everyone who was killed deserves to be recognized as a victim. If you're gonna produce merch that makes light of the estimated 30,000 to 60,000 people who were killed over the 300 some years of the witch panics, you could at least get the facts straight. The witch imagery can be used as a playful way to point out sexism, you know, as a symbol. I guess if you're going to a march that is about disappearing reproductive rights, wearing a witch's hat might bring a bit of levity to a very depressing topic. But it is fair to ask, if you're going to look at the many bad things that have happened to women and use it as your example to make a point, you may as well pick something true. There's a lot to choose from. Oh my, that dropped. So in light of all this, I do think it's understandable that people associate this branding with twee, girlboss, neoliberal feminism. Because the reality was, the women who were accused couldn't have been without the help of women who were better off than them. And that dynamic lives on today. We are the daughters of the women who prosecuted, accused, but were also murdered for being witches. We are the daughters of a system that ties women into knots by creating harmful power dynamics between different groups of women. Okay, so it won't win any prizes for being catchy, but at least it's accurate. And most importantly, witch hunts aren't over. And I don't mean in a symbolic sense. I mean actual witch hunts where people are killed and exiled from their communities. In Papua New Guinea, they do burn accused witches. In Ghana, women accused of witchcraft are banished to remote camps that are essentially open-air prisons. People with albinism have been targeted in Tanzania. These are just a few examples. This is still going on today in a bunch of countries to thousands of people. And it is absolutely horrifying, so just giving you that warning before you go down that rabbit hole. So yeah, it's nice to exonerate victims of the historical witch hunts from the early modern period, as they have in New England, Germany, Scotland, Catalonia. You know, that is a symbolic gesture that those people were wrongly persecuted. I don't think that's meaningless. However, that must be done with the acknowledgement that this is not a closed chapter in history. It's not simply a metaphor. It's not simply a provocative slogan. It is the reality for thousands of people today. Anywho, you might have noticed that I've barely spoken about actual witches so far. I've spoken about the symbol of the witch in relation to feminism, accused witches, but not actual witchcraft, or even people who seriously identify as witches. And that's a shame, because although I understand the seductiveness of using it as a symbol, I find the idea of marginalized people using witchcraft as a way to fight the power much more intriguing, beguiling even, bewitching. So I totally get why people who are actual witches roll their eyes when they hear people say, you know, I'm a witch because I'm a feminist. You know, it's a bit tired. And to be fair, I've literally used that metaphor myself. Guilty as charged. There's a book called In Defense of Witches, The Legacy of the Witch Hunts and Why Women Are Still on Trial. And I found a review that kind of opened my eyes. Let's Stop Taking the Witchcraft Out of the Witches by Sarah Lyons. In Defense of Witches makes a good many important points. The issue I have is that these points have been made many, many, many times, not just in academic or scholarly work, but in wildly popular films, TV shows, and novels. That powerful women are maligned, quite literally demonized, and that the witch is a potent symbol of this oppression is hardly a novel observation, regardless of how important it is. What I long for in feminist discourse is not just an embrace of the witch as a symbol, but a deep interrogation of magic and why women have for millennia turned to it as a source of power. Well, Sarah, funny you mention it, I do plan to do so later in this video. Because especially in the past few years, you know, in the public eye, it has become more about the magic, about the craft. And it's been a hoot. As you might have gathered, historically, it's not been safe to openly practice witchcraft. And it still isn't in some places. How did it go from being ultra taboo to a cool counterculture? Firstly, I'd say the rise in Wicca, a religion founded in the mid-20th century. Also, media media representation. By the 1990s, witches had bewitched mainstream Hollywood, but weren't being portrayed as villains. You had Hocus Pocus, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, The Craft, Charmed, Practical Magic, and many more. Witches started being depicted through the themes of adolescence, sisterhood, and family. Witches were no longer solely perceived as agents of Satan, but cool girls and women who had agency and autonomy over their lives. I was drawn, age 9, to the witches of fiction. Unlike other female characters, they didn't need a prince to rescue them from a tower. They'd fly out of it themselves, back to their confectionery-clad houses, a cat by their side. As a teenager, I moved on to the late 90s variety of witch, who had the power to save themselves from the dangers and vulnerabilities of being an adolescent girl. So yeah, a lot of witchy stories can be described as power fantasies. The book Leo explores this in great depth, so go check that out. She discusses how the persecuted woman becomes the powerful magic woman in these stories, but also the murkiness around the question of who is being empowered. Witch stories are enticing to those who feel like outcast and rebels, and of course, witches became pretty. They were de-haggified, and you saw some domestic witches, as my friend Girl on Film calls them. Think Bewitched.
Only bad witches are ugly.
So when I say witches became mainstream in Hollywood, it was often a sanitized, pretty version. Hello, this is Future Tara dressed as the Love Witch. There is a fun exception to this, and it is from a children's book called Room on the Broom. So it's by the same lady who wrote The Gruffalo, and she looks like a traditional witch. She is haggified, but her whole thing is being nice to animals, and it's very cute and wholesome, and I love it, and I'd really recommend reading it or watching the little animation. It has Gillian Anderson. Because what better way to encapsulate the extent to which witchcraft has fallen prey to the Instagram-friendly version of womanhood, pretty, non-threatening, competitive within our own ranks, lest we turn our attention outward. It reminded me something Sabrina Scott had said about how stereotypes, the nasty wicked witch, have just been replaced with new, more palatable ones. If I had to choose, she said, I'd rather be the scary old hag covered in warts. Despite all of this, you still had, and have, people earnestly practicing witchcraft, warts and all. But as something becomes more marketable and thereby mainstream, the potions get contaminated. I'm referring to the wellness industry. Let's call it the goopification of witchcraft. Let's address the elephant in the room. Ooh, Zootopia reference. I'm so excited for the sequel. Let's go! Try everything! Anywho, the elephant in the room. Witchcraft isn't a religion. It's a practice. But one might use witchcraft as a part of their religious practice. One can practice witchcraft without having any religious affiliations whatsoever. Comprende? I won't get into the weeds. Ooh, there's a metaphor for you, you know, weeds, because they use them for spells. But witchcraft is practiced amongst a vast array of cultures. So if, for example, you're interested in learning about the history of hoodoo, Intellectual Media has an in-depth video on the topic. What I'd like to focus on is the goopification and girlbossification of witchcraft. Sorry, I've got a little tickle in my throat, so if I've got a bit of fry at the moment, that's why. There's an irony in how witchcraft, in its purest form, seems to be about connecting with nature and being accessible to anyone, but it is being co-opted by the wellness industry. Witch swag has its own market, with crystals and pentagram dream catchers having been sold at Urban Outfitters. Starbucks released a witch's brew frappuccino, and from looking at it, I'd sooner drink piss. Wellness and new age spirituality are nothing new, but they have garnered even more interest due to the pandemic. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Yelp noted a 74% increase in Americans searching for psychics and a 63% uptick in searches for astrologers. One can charge quite the premium on witchy services if they find the right clientele. Kate Thomas is a 43-year-old professional witch and spiritual mentor whose clients include Lena Dunham and Megan Mullally. She even dated Andrew Garfield, and they've since split, so Watch out, Andy. Her readings cost $1,500 for 45 minutes. The price also includes 2 days of conversations on WhatsApp to further discuss the reading, and is usually followed by a 6-month minimum spiritual mentorship contract for $4,000 per month. Magic takes time, Thomas told the Sunday Times in a recent interview. It can't happen overnight. This article also mentions a psychic who's based in Lisbon and charges $700 for a 45-minute reading, and she has a 5-year wait list. Yep, you're gonna have to. You're being really disruptive and badly behaved. Apologies, I just had to kick my son out. Where was I? Here's the thing. People are free to spend their money however they please. But this commodification does have knock-on effects. In the more abstract sense, it creates issues with cultural perception. If witchcraft is just seen as wellness retreats, overpriced tarot readings and crystals, it's not treated with the same respect as other spiritual practices. So I don't believe in any deity, but I am a believer in fairness. So if you're going to respect and protect one religion's practices, that should apply to all. All or none. Witchcraft may not be a religion, but it can be an important part of one's religious practice. For example, voodoo is a religion, but there are Christians who see voodoo as demonic. When, let's be real, performing an exorcism is gnarly behaviour. As for the concrete effects, it essentially gentrifies the practice, making it less accessible and even leading to environmental degradation. Yeah. Sephora received backlash after announcing in September 2018 it would offer a 9-piece starter witch kit by the brand Pinrose, which included fragrances, tarot cards, sage, and a rose quartz crystal. A witchy person called Katie Carpet responded to the controversy by releasing an ethically sourced witch kit on her website The Witchery Way. In her kit, the white sage came from a First Nations reserve near her home in Edmonton, where she said that the sellers knew what she was using it for and were paid fairly. Some people would go even further and say that you shouldn't be using white sage at all, as it is traditionally used in smudging. The smudging ritual popular in witchcraft is derived from indigenous tradition. Okay, so on to white sage. White sage is commonly used in the indigenous tradition known as smudging, and it's essentially cleansing a space and warding off evil. The practice of smudging was illegal in both the US and Canada due to laws suppressing indigenous religious practices. White sage is frequently used by the wellness industry, having been sold in Walmart and Anthropology. I'm afraid I'm about to sound very British, but I don't know how else to put it. The cheek of it! And to make matters even worse, it's not always harvested in the best ways, i.e., it's essential that you leave the root so the plant grows back. So if someone who's harvesting white sage doesn't know how to do so properly, they're preventing more plants from growing and therefore endangering the species. So if you're, let's say, a corporation looking to make a quick buck, you're probably not going to be as invested in caring for the land than the people who live on it. The goop sphere getting its grubby little mitts on witchcraft is a real shame, in my opinion, as it is fundamentally at odds with the whole meaning of witchcraft. At least how I understand it. The way to combat this is to show people what witchcraft is really about. There will always be capitalist appropriation of identities and movements that were once relegated to the fringes. I believe the first line of defense is raising awareness about where these symbols originated from and why they ring hollow when co-opted for corporate gain. And to be clear, I don't think the people participating in this are necessarily doing so cynically. Lots of people are looking for meaning and this is being monetized. The whole point is that you don't need any things to be a witch. It needn't cost $1,000. Earlier I referenced the girlbossification of witchiness, and I think it perfectly connects to the commodification of witchiness. The issue with more corporate girlbossy feminism is that it's for sale. It doesn't challenge the status quo. It puts witchiness in a cutesy package, when actually, what if it should be a bit scary? It's about harnessing power. Women who want to engage in me time may be better off with soap baths or adult colouring books. Witches have always embodied the perceived threat of female power. There is a certain amount of co-opting going on when feminists employ witches as a shorthand for female rage. If you're someone who goes as far as putting a hex on Trump, you obviously want shit to happen. Now, when it comes to the digitalness of it all, how does one distinguish between someone looking to make a quick buck versus someone who is earnestly looking to harness their witchy power? There are witches who claim they really want to help people, whereas there are some who will simply do tarot readings that will get the most views rather than being the most faithful readings. Well, this is tricky. It's all very tricky. Let's get digital. Digital Etsy witches have entered the chat. Witch talk, witchcore, whimsy goth. None of these words are in the Bible, which is fine actually, because we're talking about witches today. As well as articles, films, TV shows, books, Witch Talk has been a helpful resource in my research. If you're someone who's looking to try out some spells, manifest good fortune, or have a spell cast for your back pain, TikTok has it all. The witchiness that we see online is aesthetically beautiful. Beep World made this point in her video on the whimsy goth trend, and it's basically this. We had minimalism and millennials embraced it, perhaps a little too much, whereas collecting trinkets, plants, crystals, etc. is at odds with it. It's a pushback to that often soulless minimalism, bringing back character and whimsy. You know, on the flip side, this can encourage overconsumption, which goes for any aesthetic trend that goes viral, and micro trends. But it isn't just witchy fashion that's trending, it's witchcraft itself. Formerly, you'd purchase spells in the form of roll-on perfumes in a witchy shop. But what if you live in an area that isn't witch-friendly? What if you live in the Bible Belt? The internet might be the only way for you to get into the craft or access witchy services. There is now a sizable market for Etsy witches, and you won't be short of recommendations by fellow TikTok users. In fact, if an influencer recommends your services, it can be extremely lucrative for an Etsy witch. Just when you thought weddings couldn't get any more expensive, you can also pay to hire the service of an Etsy witch to cast good weather on your wedding day. Recently, influencer Jazz Smith hired an Etsy witch for good weather on her wedding day, and due to her recommendation, the UK-based Etsy witch Naturalistic Blessing had to pause trading. There are hundreds of such practitioners offering good weather spells. Google searches for Etsy witches have risen 80% since the end of June this year. So why do people do this? Well, it's low risk, high reward. These spells tend to be charged at a low rate for as low as $12. You know, they require no in-person contact or effort from the customer. You know, if it doesn't work, oh well, it's only a little bit of cash. And then if it does, yippee! In terms of customers, there seems to be a mix of those who genuinely believe in it.
I paid $14 and it was the best $14 I've spent.
Versus those who are doing it semi-ironically as a sort of shot in the dark.
I paid an Etsy witch to postpone my period so that it wouldn't come during my 2-week European vacation that also spanned my birthday. Here are the results. Not only did I get my period, I got it the day after I paid the Etsy witch to cast the spell, and I got it insanely heavy to the point where I think now I'm going to seek a diagnosis for PMDD. I don't know if I would recommend the Etsy witch route, at least not the one that I selected, which, to be fair, was a last-minute decision. I don't know if I gave her the best shot. My recommendation, if you're looking to delay your period via an Etsy witch, would be to do your research, read a lot of reviews. I did my research on the plane. It was kind of quick, and I just made a rash decision. And also plan ahead. I looked at a lot of other Etsy witches that said they needed like a few weeks for the spell to manifest. So I think you need to give it more time in advance.
For some, whether it truly works is besides the point. It's about the effort, the intention, the acknowledgement that something is out of your control. This can be very powerful psychologically, and I remember when looking through Witch Talk, I saw this TikTok.
Here's a witch tip that my grandmother and auntie taught me. If someone's bugging you or getting under your skin, write their name on a piece of paper, put that piece of paper in your shoe, and walk on them. Walk on them. That's it. It's kind of like energetically elevating yourself above their energy, putting them below you. Try it out. Let me know if it works.
And I'm not gonna lie, I needed it in that moment. Paying for these services is like tithings. But what about the ethics of all this? How is it regulated? The reason Etsy is the hub for these services is because they moved from eBay when it was banned in 2012. Etsy did also ban it in 2015, but you can now purchase them under divination readings that do not advertise metaphysical outcomes. So there's a bit of a loophole. And they do need to come with a physical item, so like a PDF of the spell or a picture of you doing the spell, proof of service. Now, I'll preface this by reminding you that I'm not a believer in magic. So when I say genuine versus scammer, I don't mean does it work versus does it not work, because I don't think it's fair to lump in people who earnestly believe in magic, but it might not work, with the people who don't believe in it but sell it cynically, knowing it won't work.
At the Mariners batting practice today, one fan stole some of the spotlight. Steven was invited out by the team after buying what's become a sort of good luck charm.
Searched Etsy Witch on Etsy and found the first one that did generic spells.
Ever since the spell was cast, the Mariners have been on a hot streak, including tonight. They just won again, and some fans are convinced that the witch is working her magic. This story has blown up online, so much so that people have offered to pay Steven back for the Etsy witch. Instead, he's asked people to donate to the Trevor Project. That's a nonprofit that provides mental health support for the LGBTQ community.
You know, a person providing a tarot reading, whether it be in person or over Zoom, is providing a service. They're giving you their time, so why shouldn't they be able to charge for it? You know, I'm here entertaining you for money. I'd have been a court jester back in the day for sure. With all that being said, because there are so many of these shops and this is all blown up, there is a lack of regulation. I mean, there's even AI spellcasters. Boo! It can also be difficult to tell the sincere from the scammer because often people leave reviews before they've waited to see if it works. It's all a minefield. And even after researching all of this for ages, I'm still torn on the ethical murkiness of all this. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. To be clear, there are many good practitioners with a code of ethics in their work. So in this Vice article back from 2014, they interviewed an Etsy witch who said that if she suspects someone is having a mental health crisis, she will refund their money and tell them to go to a psychiatrist. But then I think about how the fact that these services probably attract people with mental health issues, you know, they're desperate, and like even some of them might have magic OCD. You know, how do you vet for this as a practitioner? Do you have a moral obligation to do so? You know, if you're a fitness trainer teaching a fitness class, is it your ethical duty to make sure that every person who attends doesn't have body dysmorphia or an ED? You know, I am ambivalent on the ethics of all this, in case you couldn't tell. Miss Grey, 39, sells enchantments like the Fiery Wall of Protection for $27.89, which, she said, shields your aura and spiritual self from any negativity, ill will, and other spell work. In 2019, she opened an Etsy storefront, but she doesn't say yes to every customer. I stay away from people who want to be in a relationship with someone who is already in a relationship, she said. Whereas there are some spellcasters who are happy to do so. I found this TikTok.
Guys, the Etsy witch told on me. Like, I bought a love spell and I literally, like I said, the guy's name, like his birthday and stuff, and she literally DM'd him on Instagram and exposed me. She sent him screenshots of everything I said.
I can't tell if it's a joke or if she actually got ratted out by her Etsy witch. I really hope it's a joke, because that is mortifying. Now, there are even people who will cast harm spells for their customers, which has caused a real hoo-ha lately. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Oh yeah, now we're getting into it. The girls have been busy. Speaking of opportunistic sellers,
Elon motherfucking Musk! I just paid an Etsy witch $7.99 to make your life a living hell. Brace yourself.
After the Elon Musk TikTok blew up, an Etsy witch claimed that it was her when it wasn't. More than 170,000 people watched the video, and 26 people went to her store and paid $7.99 for a package to curse Musk. But the customer from the Elon Musk video claims that the practitioner she hired wanted to be kept anonymous. I think that's dead cheeky, but anyways. Such spells have been cast on Brett Kavanaugh in 2017, which has performed a mass spell to prevent Trump from doing harm.
Ah, here we go. Here is a picture of... I don't say his name. Some of you don't say his name. Oh, 1 minute and counting. Okay, this is the orange guy that this ceremony is for. There he is. All right, I believe it's time to begin. There you go. I believe demons like to have this ceremony because then they can start fresh and new. Just like a tree doesn't cry over losing its leaf, the devil, Satan, always gets another, or thinks he can. So you're fired, you're fired, you're fired. Ha, 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 ha. So mote it be, so mote it be, so mote it be.
And of course, the recent of Charlie Kirk. As a result, Google searches for Etsy Witch jolted over 600% in the wake of the assassination. Days before his death, the online publication Jezebel published the article, "We paid some Etsy witches to curse Charlie Kirk." So, I don't think that these spells had anything remotely to do with Kirk's death. So the backlash against these articles, to me, seems misplaced. The article was taken down and they added an amendment saying that they don't condone what happened. But even when you read the original article, it's clear that she's being glib. If Kirk wants a villain, I'm more than happy to be the hag of his nightmares. I want to make it clear. I'm not calling on dark forces to cause him harm. I just want him to wake up every morning with an inexplicable zit. I want his podcast microphone to malfunction every time he hits record. I want his blue blazers to suddenly all be one size too small. I want one of his socks to always be sliding down his foot. I want his thumb to grow too big to tweet. To ruin his day with the collective feminist power of the Etsy coven would be my life's greatest joy. So I think it's fair to say that she wasn't wishing death on him. The Etsy witch who was hired did have an interesting response. While we cannot claim literal responsibility for Mr. Kirk's death, we do affirm that the magic we work with is effective. If we lived in a society where magic was completely normalized and everyone believed in it, she would have to lawyer up. Naturally, the close proximity of this article to his death has triggered a sort of mini satanic panic in the right-wing media.
As a matter of fact, if you want to join the fight with me, hit the thumbs up right now.
And if you can't tell by the name, Jezebel is not a Christian site, okay? It is secular, left-wing, degenerate, demonic, disgusting nonsense, okay? That's what fills the pages of Jezebel. And let this just be a lesson for all of you agnostic people out there who don't know quite yet what to think. Evil clearly exists. And evil hates goodness, and darkness hates light.
If you've never heard of him, I envy you. And then it just blasts him. It talks about he's against women. I think it's referencing abortion. Jezebel loves abortion. Mm-hmm. They've done hit pieces on me before. They love abortion at Jezebel. That is really their sacrament. It's named after Jezebel, this spirit of rejection of God and rejection of everything that is good.
So she is a pro-life activist who has interviewed ex-witches and occult folk. She even interviewed a guest who had had a very difficult life and had experienced abuse and addiction, and attributes that to her former practice of the dark arts.
Ouija boards?
Yeah.
When did you first do that?
That was in middle school, and it started with a friend at a sleepover who had one of the, I believe it's Hasbro glow-in-the-dark ones, and it was just exciting.
Hasbro. The toy company has a Ouija board.
Yes.
So none of this is anything new. There were people at my elementary school who weren't allowed to read Harry Potter because it was demonic. Stevie Nicks was accused of being a witch.
I have a lot of more important things that I could worry about besides people thinking that I'm a witch. All you have to do is come by my house, drop in. There's no owls up there, and it's silly.
Evangelical Christians in particular are suspicious of witches and occult practices. And this leads me to the question, can one be a conservative witch? Yes, but it's uncommon. For example, there's a Facebook page called Witches for Trump, as well as others like Pagans for Trump and American Pagans for Trump. Since hard leftists dominate pagan spaces, centrists, libertarians, and conservative pagan voices are silenced there. Most of our group rituals and spells involve protecting ourselves, Trump, and anyone who's being threatened with magic. These are few and far between, though. If digital witches are political, it is typically towards the left. Rather than aimlessly yapping, I'm gonna list the reasons for why I think this is. So, firstly, alternative religions provide a space for spiritual people who aren't accepted by traditional religions, like queer people. According to a 2015 survey conducted by Pew Research Center, around twice as many queer adults as the general public say they identify as a member of a non-Christian faith group, including Wicca and paganism. Secondly, the economy, baby. Etsy witches have reported an increased demand by people who experience job insecurity. Money spells are all over TikTok. People are struggling. They can't afford healthcare or therapy or rent. So it's no wonder they're turning to other resources. Thirdly, after years of such practices being stigmatized and suppressed, there are Americans embracing spiritual traditions attached to their roots. So for example, brujería, which refers to various spiritual practices that have been used by African, Caribbean, and indigenous Latin American populations, is having a visible resurgence among millennial Afro descendants. And lastly, which is particularly topical, is the looming threat to many Americans' immigration status. So immigration raids have led to an increase in demand for protection spells. So there's a lot to be afraid of. Way long ago in this video, I showed a quote that I'd like to remind you of. What I long for in feminist discourse is not just an embrace of the witch as a symbol, but a deep interrogation of magic and why women have for millennia turned to it as a source of power. Who are the people turning to magic? Marginalized groups. It all feels very cyclical. Magic is among the things that people turn to when things are becoming uncontrollable, when things are becoming uncertain, when you know the normal methods you use to shore up your life and provide some certainty don't seem to be working anymore. And this is a quote from Michael Bailey, a history professor at the Iowa State University who specializes in medieval Europe and witchcraft. So I guess this is why I shouldn't have been surprised by the number of witchy folk who are in my audience. And I also wanted to add that in terms of witches helping their communities, it isn't just about protection spells or spells at all, it's the skills they pick up in their witching endeavors. So herbalism, foraging, even just mending clothes. So it appears to me that being a witch is not just about the craft and the spells, it can be about what you can give back with those skills. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And on that bright note, I wanted to add that just as I'm releasing this, I got gifted this. It's a witch platypus. How cute is this? Oh my god. Look at her. Her name's Sabrina. She's even got an adoption certificate. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, whether you are witchy or non-witchy. Here is today's subscription pet shout-out. And today I chose a mostly black cat because what's more witchy than that? Here is Princess Zelda, a little feral, a little baby. She's very sweet, always wanting to be next to someone, typically rolling over to show her secret white tummy. But she also drinks toilet water and gets 3 AM zoomers after waking up her mum by purring too loudly next to her. She is a good girl and I will hear nothing else. Round of applause for Princess Zelda. Woo woo! Bye.